Tick talk. Traditionally, snow and cooler temperatures meant the end of having to be vigilant about ticks. But not so fast, say researchers. We'll talk ticks and why wintertime is the new summertime for ticks. Good afternoon, and thank you for stopping by Across the Fence. I'm Keith Silva. When I came to Vermont about 30 or so years ago, I remember being on a hike with a friend, a Vermonter, and asking if we should watch out for ticks. It's too cold for them up here, she said. For many of you watching today, you probably gave the same advice to a flatlander at one point or another. Well, that notion and advice is no longer valid, if it ever was. As we get into the colder months, we're going to find out why this is happening now and how to avoid getting bit by a tick when it's winter. Joining me to talk ticks is Patti Casey. She's the Director of Environmental Surveillance Program at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, which includes tick and mosquito surveillance statewide. Welcome back to Across the Fence, Patti.
Thank you very much.
We were talking before we started taping. As I was writing this lead, I was starting to doubt myself and wondered if I was overselling this. Am I overselling this? Are there ticks in winter? Should we be concerned?
I don't think you're overselling it. I think it's important to be vigilant. Things are changing. We are documenting tick activity in Vermont in the winter months, and it's safe to say that there's more activity now because there are simply more ticks. They are expanding their territory, but we've really only been formally tracking them for a little over a decade, so we're still seeing trends. But during that time, we have seen a fairly steady northeastward movement of their territory. So we don't typically find them in the Northeast Kingdom a whole lot, but we are starting to find them on the edges of the Northeast Kingdom, and we didn't previously. So they are definitely up and can be active in the winter months.
So Northeast Kingdom, what about the northwestern side of the state along the lake? Same expansion?
They're there.
They're there.
They're already there.
They're
yep.
already there. Okay.
Yep.
The Vermont Department of Health publishes data on visits to urgent care from tick bites, and there's been an increase during those months that we'd expect, April to August, and then again September to November. Do you look for ticks in the winter like you do the rest of the year?
Well, we have conducted year-round surveillance for a few years, and we continue to do so as funding and time allows us to do. Adult ticks, which are the most visible, they're most active in the spring and the fall, which is probably why urgent care sees so many more visits for tick bites, because they're more visible. But other times of the year are very critical to be vigilant as well. Summer months are the time when nymphs are active, and they're much, much smaller and harder to detect on your body, but they can still transmit diseases. They have a lower disease infection rate than do adults because they've had fewer blood meals, as we call them. Not very appealing, but
yes,
that's the term. But winter is now a concern because we do see those warmer days. And in fact, so here we are mid-December, we just had some ticks submitted a couple of days ago to our lab for identification. And when we go out looking for them with our flags, we drag for them,
yep.
We have found them in January and February in the past.
Okay. When you were saying, life cycle of the tick, nymph is the beginning of the life cycle before adult?
It goes from egg to larva, which
okay.
are nearly invisible.
Okay.
But fortunately, they are also called clean, which means they have not picked up a disease yet. They pick up a disease with their first blood meal,
okay.
usually in a rodent. And then they move on to their next life stage, which is nymph.
Okay.
So egg, larva, nymph, and then adult.
And then adult, okay.
Yep.
And it gets problematic from nymph on up, but certainly at that larval stage, they can still, can you get bit by a tick in the larva stage?
You absolutely can.
Okay.
I've had them on me before. I mean, they're so small. We find them on the flags, and they're nearly invisible.
Right. If you've got to get bit by a tick, you want the larval stage because they're
with the larva.
They're probably clean. As
Yep.
you said, those are your clean tick bites.
Yep.
Okay, we haven't brought it up yet. I think we're about 5 minutes in. The expansion of tick territory due to climate change, due to warmer temperatures, less rain, more rain, what?
Well, climate change is particularly difficult to nail down, the changes associated with it, because they're happening very fast.
Sure.
And it's going to take some time to track the changes as they relate to the tick population in Vermont. But what is not in question are the temperatures at which ticks become active. So, and when they're active is when they're looking for a blood meal. So they're looking for a host. And we know that as our climate changes, we are seeing more of those warm days in the winter and sometimes even several warm days in a row. It does not take very long for a tick to become active once the temperature rises above freezing. So they will travel up vegetation and they do what's called questing. They hang on with their little hind legs and they stick their front legs out and they're waiting for someone to walk by, basically. They're opportunistic. And as soon as the temperatures hit 40 to 45 degrees, they will be out there. So we are seeing those warmer ambient temperatures in the wintertime. So the warm breaks are allowing ticks to come up and be active. So if they did not get on a host in the fall, there's a chance they could die in the winter if they don't have access to a host. But these warm breaks are allowing them to get on a host, which will increase their likelihood of survival.
And as the territory has expanded, have ticks adapted to the colder temperatures of the Northeast Kingdom, let's say? Do they hibernate? What's going on?
So they don't really hibernate, that's a pretty specific term, but they can overwinter in all 4 of their life stages. They survive freezing temperatures by going dormant, which is slightly different from hibernation.
Sure.
They go dormant in the leaf litter or they go underground in small crevices and so forth. So that's how they can survive.
A good lesson to young journalists out there: don't use words like hibernate when you're talking to a scientist. They get they don't like that.
It's okay. I knew what you meant.
Oh, I know. You're very kind. So thank you. Okay, so it warms up in the middle of December, January, gets above freezing. Ticks come out. We get a big snowstorm the next day. End of ticks?
No. No. Very short answer to that. No. Snow is actually, a lot of times people think, well, it snows in Vermont, so we're safe.
Right. That's
going to kill the ticks. It actually doesn't. It actually can help the tick population survive the winter. So earlier life stages of ticks in particular require a lot of humidity. They're very prone to desiccation or drying out. So a nice layer of snow both insulates and it provides humidity, which will allow ticks to overwinter more successfully in the environment if they haven't attached to a host.
They haven't attached.
Yep. So and we know they can survive freezing temperatures because Vermont freezes. It's pretty well established that Vermont freezes, and there are populations here, so we know they can survive the cold temperatures. But as we were talking about earlier, a very cold winter with little snow cover is likely to kill off a lot of the earlier stages in the tick's life cycle. So larvae, nymphs, even the adults can be subject to desiccating and freezing in that leaf litter. So that will mean fewer ticks come springtime. It's important to remember that ticks have a 2-year life cycle, though.
Okay.
So there may be some that are just, that it needs to work its way through that cycle.
Okay. Parents with small children, pet owners, should you be checking those pets or small children when they come in from the cold? You know, you were 1 minute you're building a snowman, the next you're drinking hot cocoa and getting a tick check. Is that reasonable?
Well, it depends on the environment that you've been in.
Okay.
You need to be in contact with vegetation of some kind to expose yourself to ticks.
Even the lawn? Even if you were out in your front lawn?
If you're on your front lawn, most ticks in Vermont don't like short grass.
Okay.
They need a little bit more height in their vegetation. It's a good idea to be in the habit of doing tick checks every day if you're spending time outdoors, because the really active tick season can kind of sneak up on you a little bit before you know it. They're out, and if you're not really in the habit of doing it, then some might slip by you.
Right.
I am just in the habit of doing it. I'm outdoors a lot, and when I come in, I take my clothes off and put them in the dryer on high for 15 or 20 minutes, and I jump in the shower, which is nice if you've been outdoors. Before your hot cocoa, wash yourself off and do a tick check while you're in the shower.
Okay. The black-legged ticks, when we've had you on before, that's sort of Vermont's #1, tick with a bullet. Are they the only ones to watch out for at this time of year, in wintertime or any time?
Well, so Vermont has 15 different species of ticks, just to set the stage.
Yep, yep.
A lot of them are very host specific, like rabbit, squirrel ticks, bird ticks, and we don't really find those a whole lot in our surveillance efforts. But yes, black-legged ticks are the ticks of most concern because they cause more than 99% of all the tick-borne disease in Vermont. We do see American dog ticks as well, but they are not known to transmit diseases in the Northeast. It really is the black-legged tick that is of most concern. There are 2 other ticks in Vermont that are capable of vectoring disease or transmitting disease. So Lone Star tick and the woodchuck tick, we have very rarely seen them come into our lab for identification, but we do know that they can be here. So it's important to get the tick identified that you're looking at.
Just a couple minutes left. We talked about changing climates as a factor. Your colleagues in some of the research that I was reading also talk about forest fragmentation and suburbanization. I can figure out what those, I can get the context clues from there, but why are those 2 things such a big concern for folks like yourselves studying these insects?
Well, ticks will go where there is suitable habitat and hosts, and fragmented landscape is perfect for both ticks and hosts because it provides protection for ticks and vegetation for them to crawl up and quest off.
Okay.
And also deer, mice, other rodents, they really love those edge areas. So fragmentation of landscape creates a lot of edge areas between a lawn and a forest or a cornfield and a forest. You will find a lot of the hosts there, and it's also just perfect habitat for ticks. So the fragmentation of landscape in Vermont is helping.
And the suburbanization, just, a suburb, a development goes in that those fringe sort of little forest pockets before a field or before something that hasn't been developed yet, those are where the ticks are going to hide out.
Exactly. Stone walls, any fringy vegetation between homes. Yep.
Stone walls, plenty of those in Vermont. Patti, thank you very much for coming and talking about this. I feel better. I feel like that I was right in my thinking that we have to worry about ticks in the wintertime. I wish it wasn't the case. And here's hoping for a less snowy but cold winter.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for stopping by Across the Fence. My thanks to the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX who make our program possible. This is Across the Fence. I'm Keith Silva. Have a good one.